Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now, here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. We're here to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. We look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's show on the climate change imperative for clean energy. Now, we now are in a world when climate change's economic and health impacts are no longer distant and imperceptible. Puerto Rico has never fully recovered from Hurricane Maria in 2017, and extreme droughts in California, perhaps due to poorly maintained utility power lines, have led to severe wildfires in 2018, as well as leading to the utilities' bankruptcy, as well as blackouts last year. And of course, we still do not fully know the impact from Australia's recent bushfires. We do know it was pretty devastating, as we have talked with a couple of researchers from Queensland University perhaps 3 or 4 issues ago. And we know that it was so devastating that they think that they've actually lost some whole species of some of their plants as well as animals. Now, while in most cases, some folks are still debating whether climate change can be directly blamed for any single extreme weather event, we do know scientifically there is a strong influence, including Hurricane Maria, the California wildfires, and Australia's bushfires. It does make such events much, much more likely. And these events are starting to be much more than tail events. They're starting to affect economic outcomes, including healthcare costs that are actually already out of control. Climate crises in the next 30 years may very well resemble the financial crises we've seen in recent decades, potentially even more destructive than we've seen heretofore, and largely unpredictable given the underlying causes. They are inevitable. Climate has actually muscled its way to the top of our business worries. Looking ahead, researchers estimate that the probability of a 10% drop in wheat, corn, soybean, and rice yields in any given year will rise from currently at around 6% to 15% in 2050. They also estimate that the probability of a catastrophic cyclone disrupting semiconductor manufacturing will double or quadruple by 2040, thus possibly having a very significant effect on our ability to produce all those electronic devices that we have come to depend on so much. Also, they estimate that the probability of heavy rain that's heavy enough to halt mining in southeastern China will rise from about 2.5% currently to about 6% in 2050. Yet, talking about this isn't the same as doing something about it. Now, something that we do know that can make a significant difference that is within our grasp and our ability to affect is our energy production and our energy sources. And here today to help us unpack this, co-host Tony Keene. Tony is president and CEO of EarthX, and well, they are sponsors of this broadcast. Our guest, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. Dr. Hayhoe is a professor in the Public Administration program at Texas Tech University and director of the Climate Science Center at Texas Tech. Her research focuses on developing and applying high-resolution climate projections to evaluate the future impacts of climate change on human society as well as the natural environment. And she has published over 125 peer-reviewed abstracts and a number of bestsellers. She currently serves on numerous boards and advises many organizations. But of particular interest to me, she is an evangelical Christian, as am I. And she's the daughter of missionaries and the wife of a pastor. In addition to her research on climate change, Dr. Hayhoe is also known for her communication around climate change and her advocacy efforts around climate action. She's also been nominated for Texan of the Year this year, although she is Canadian, but we are going to claim her and we're going to keep her. Welcome, Dr. Hayhoe. We're so glad you could join us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we want to start out, though, talking about, again, want to focus a little bit on economics first. Where and when do you see in our nation that we're currently feeling and experiencing the economic impact of climate change and unclean energy? And how and where are we feeling it here in Texas?
So climate change disproportionately affects the poorest and most vulnerable people, both here at home as well as on the other side of the world. Since the 1960s, climate change has already increased the economic gap between the richest and poorest countries in the world by 25%. And again, those poorest countries are the ones who have done the least to contribute to the problem. Here in the United States, though, the main economic impact that we experience is through the way that climate change is supersizing our extremes. You asked earlier, is there still a debate over whether climate change caused a certain event or not? And the answer is no, because that's not even the right question to ask. We know that we have always had droughts and floods and hurricanes and storms. That's a normal part of life here on this planet. But we also know that climate change is making them worse. And today we can put numbers on how much it's making it worse. So, for example, Hurricane Harvey. We know that there was a massive hurricane in 1900 that hit Galveston. So hurricanes are nothing new in that area. But we also know that as the ocean warms, it is making more powerful hurricanes with more rain associated with them that are bigger and they're moving more slowly. So Hurricane Harvey was a textbook example of how climate change is taking a natural event and making it worse. And it's estimated that almost 40% of the rain that fell during Hurricane Harvey would not have occurred if the same hurricane had happened 100 years ago. So 40% carries a specific amount of economic damages with it, especially in places that received almost 50 inches of rain. That is one of the biggest ways that we are being hit today. We see the same thing out in California, where wildfires are a natural part of the ecosystem, but we know today that the area burned by wildfires since the 1980s has more than doubled as a result of a changing climate.
That's interesting, and it certainly puzzles me and challenges me as to why there would be any deniers around at all with these types of facts and figures.
The rejection of the science has nothing to do with the actual science or even the evidence of our own eyes. The number one reason why people reject this issue is solution aversion. We believe, because we've been told repeatedly, that the only solutions to climate change involve destroying the economy or socialism or communism or letting China or the United Nations rule the world or even abortion. I've been told that the only solution is to kill the babies. And frankly, if any of those are the solution to climate change, I'm not really on board with them either. And so rather than saying, are there any solutions I can be on board with, instead we think, well, people we trust have told us that the only solutions to climate change are completely incompatible with my ideology and my values. So our defense mechanism is to say, well, it can't possibly be a real problem then. Because if it's a real problem, I, as a good person, would want to fix it. But if I don't want to fix it, then it can't be a real problem. So we make up sciencey sounding smoke screens like it's cold outside today, or don't you know it's been warmer before in the past, or don't volcanic eruptions produce more heat-trapping gases than humans? They don't. They produce a tiny fraction of what we produce. But we make up sciencey sounding objections, and we make up economic-y sounding objections, like it will cost more to fix it than it would to just deal with the impact.
Well, Dr. Hayhoe, I couldn't agree with you more, and that's what we like to do at EarthX is to bring all those different opinions together with the hope that we can actually get something that is practical and pragmatic, and it's not going to be an alarmist position on these things. We also, getting to the whole aspect of the environment and clean energy is one of the most, if not the most impactful ways of affecting climate change, because we're hearing that, that's causing most of the energy, the gas emissions. Would you say that solving the clean energy problem would be one of the easiest solutions? Why or why not?
So 75% of this problem is caused by digging up and burning fossil fuels. 25% is caused by land use and agriculture, specifically deforestation and industrial animal agriculture. So clean energy is a huge part of the solution. And the sector where it's easiest to implement is in the electricity sector. We are already a model of this. We already have, I think, almost 20% of our electricity coming from clean energy sources. We have been number one in the U.S. for wind energy production for a number of years. And just a few years ago, we weren't even on the top 10 list for solar. But we are now number 5 for the most solar, and we are doubling our production this year and next year. So Texas is really an incredible example of how the electricity sector can be a big part of the solution.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I think the energy companies are really changing that around. So,
yay for Texas. We will be right back on the other side of the break to talk more about how Texas can actually show the way for other cities and nations as it relates to clean energy. Thank you, Dr. Hayhoe. We'll be right back after the break. Thank you for listening to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. We'd like to give a shout out to our sponsors, one of which is Tony's Organizations. That is EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience. They do the expo, the conference, the film festival, all promoting environmental awareness. It will occur this April 22nd through 26th at Fair Park in Dallas. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. We're back with Tony Keene, President and CEO of EarthX here in Dallas, and Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. Thank you for being with us again. Right before the break, we were talking about the clean energy status and how Texas is leading the way. And I'm going to throw that back to Tony to continue that conversation.
Thank you very much, Bernice. So, Dr. Hayhoe, I think this whole energy aspect is real exciting, and it's definitely a global issue, I would think, from just an issue that we have here in the U.S. So, from your background, I know I've got a little bit of experience in this area as well in terms of how does this play in the whole world? I mean, how does this whole energy revolution roll out? And, there's certain areas I think that are doing worse than others, but what are your thoughts?
Yes. So across the world now, new installed electricity is over 70% clean energy. And that's simply because prices have been falling so quickly, and many countries don't have the fossil fuel resources that we do. Even China, which is often seen as, the bulwark of coal burning, they are already shifting away from burning coal. They're selling it to other countries, and they have more wind and solar energy than any other country in the world. In fact, it's a serious concern that the United States could be left behind in the new clean energy economy based on the investments that it's been making over the last few years in trying to shore up the coal industry, which, frankly, has less jobs now than the solar energy industry in the U.S. alone. But the flip side of the coin is this. It's the fact that we're not operating in a free market. Fossil fuel use is very heavily subsidized in this country and around the world, and most people don't realize that. In the U.S. alone, fossil fuels are subsidized, the International Monetary Fund estimates, to the tune of over $650 billion a year, which exceeds the Pentagon budget. Globally, it's 6% of GDP. So the richest companies in the world, which if you go to Wikipedia's list of the richest corporations by revenue, you'll see their names, the richest companies in the world are currently being subsidized by the taxpayer to keep the cost of fossil fuels artificially low compared to clean, renewable energy. And that is the economic challenge that we face today.
Dr. Hayhoe, and I hate to be elementary here, but can you just break it down so that our listeners can understand very clearly how the fossil fuel industry is being subsidized by themselves? Because, as you mentioned, most people don't realize it.
Yes, most people think that clean energy is being heavily subsidized because we see the rebates that we get for electric cars or solar panels in our taxes. But the reality is that clean energy subsidies and rebates are less than a tenth of the subsidies that go to the fossil fuel industry. Some of those come in the form of land leases. In some cases, leases were negotiated decades ago, and they're still paying the costs that they paid back in the 1920s or earlier for that public land. In other cases, it's the fact that of the waste that they leave behind, the pollution of the streams in the Appalachians due to mountaintop removal coal mining or the coal ash pits in the Carolinas. In other cases, it's the impact of air pollution on our health. 200,000 people in the United States die every year from air pollution. Imagine if the coronavirus were killing that many people today in the U.S. It would be an absolutely different circumstance. And then also, of course, there are the costs of a changing climate on the insurance industry, on our economy, and on our resources. Then there's the tax breaks. The average American, I believe, who makes, say, $50,000, I think pays several $1,000s in corporate tax breaks. That's the subsidies that go to corporations, and a lot of the richest corporations in the world don't pay many taxes. So there's a lot of different ways that those subsidies add up. The International Monetary Fund breaks it all down in detail, but what it adds up to is the fact that the richest companies in the world are being subsidized on the taxpayer's dime to continue our reliance on old and, frankly, dirty ways of getting energy that have served us very well in the past. And I'm very grateful for the benefits that fossil fuels have brought us. But it's time now to move on to new clean ways of getting energy that we haven't been using since the 1800s, or in the case of coal, since the Middle Ages.
I agree. I remember when I was in graduate school, at the beginning of every course, the professors would say, you know why the railroads went out of business? And they would tell us, that it's because they didn't realize they were in the transportation business. They thought they were in the railroad business. And I apply that to the energy industry. I think maybe they thought they were in the oil industry or the coal industry, not realizing it's the energy industry. It's my sense that all of the energy companies, the oil companies, the coal companies, should have been the pioneers in clean energy.
Exactly. And some companies recognize that they are in the energy business. Some of the big fossil fuel companies are recognizing that we still need energy today more than ever, and they are very well positioned to invest in the research and development to start providing that. But others have decided that they are indeed in the fossil fuel industry. They are in the horse and buggy industry instead of the transportation industry. And unfortunately, they've decided that the most effective approach for their bottom line is to keep us using as much fossil fuels for as long as possible when the rest of the world is heading very quickly into the new clean energy era.
Dr. Hayhoe, one of the things that we always hear is obviously the scalability in the of that energy, and the alternative sources. Is it big enough to be able to replace our current forms of generating electricity and transportation, fueling that? What are your thoughts on that?
So people have actually analyzed this. There's a project called the Solutions Project out of Stanford University that goes through every single state in the country and shows how clean energy could supply not only electricity and transportation, but all aspects of the energy we need today. And some of those nuts are a lot harder to crack. So, for example, the Gates Foundation and Bill Gates has been investing in technology that would supply the very high temperatures that we need in steel manufacturing, and they've experienced a breakthrough recently. There's been a lot of investment in batteries and storage techniques, which can involve simply pumping water uphill when you have too much wind and then letting it roll downhill afterwards, very low tech, or it can be very high tech as well. There's industries that are looking at how we can replace the fuels in airplanes. And United Airlines is already running biofuel flights out of the LA airport. They don't have to replace the engine at all. And in fact, it runs about 15% more efficient. So electricity and transportation are a bit more straightforward, speaking specifically of cars and trucks, than other aspects of the way we use energy. But it really is possible with a mix. There's no one silver bullet. So there's no one technology that's going to be able to supply the entire world. But with a mix of technologies, which can include wind, they can include solar, they have to include storage, they can include tidal, they can include geothermal, they can include hydrokinetic, which uses stream energy. They can even include some of the new nuclear technology that is currently being developed And they're just starting to roll it out. In Oregon, NewScale, a company called NewScale, and in the UK, Rolls-Royce, which used to make cars, they are rolling out new modular nuclear reactors that are miniature reactors that are much more affordable and safe than the ones that we currently have today, which are frankly too expensive to build new ones of. So there's a whole mix of sources that we can use. There's no one silver bullet, but there are a lot of options, and we have most of them already here today.
I think this might lead us back to something you mentioned earlier. I like that phrase, solution aversion. And I've heard you say a number of times in interviews as well as talks that you've given that people really are rejecting what they perceive to be solutions in regards to clean energy. How do we change the tides of people's perception about clean energy?
Well, interestingly, they did a study in Australia, which is very similar to Texas, where they had a lot of wind energy. And they were asking people, are you suffering, for example, the health impacts of wind turbine syndrome that people often complain about? And what they found was there was one predictor of whether somebody would complain about wind energy or not, and that was whether they were financially benefiting from the turbines or not. So the reality is that we can benefit financially, and here in Texas especially, because of the way that our land rights work, there's a lot of potential for individual landowners and farmers and producers, as well as towns, to benefit financially from this new way of getting energy. And that, I think, is a big way to change people's minds, to show that there's actually benefits to this, that we can grow our economy, that we can grow local jobs. Here in Texas, per megawatt of electricity generated, there's 8 times more local jobs if it comes from wind and solar than if it comes from natural gas or other fossil fuels. So really connecting the dots in the economy, I think, is important to do. And here in Texas, we are very fortunate and blessed that we can do that more easily and more quickly than almost any other state.
How do you think, or what can we do to export our knowledge and our experience that we're having in Texas to other parts of the country and the world?
Mm-hmm. So that is a great question. We can export the energy that we produce directly, obviously, through generating electricity. And I once calculated, and that I was surprised to see that Elon Musk had done the same calculation, and we came out with the same numbers. That if you had a square area in West Texas that is about 110, 120 by 120 square mile each side, that you would be able to generate enough energy just using solar power there to supply the whole country with electricity. Now, of course, that's not practical because you have transmission and storage issues. It's much better to generate the electricity in smaller chunks, more locally. But the point is, we have a lot of potential to export electricity to the national grid, but we also have a lot of potential to export our technology and our know-how. For many years now, the fastest growing job in Texas has been wind energy technician. Here at Texas Tech, we have the National Wind Energy Institute. We are leading projects in Central America, installing new clean energy in remote villages there, wind and solar energy, where they otherwise didn't have electricity. So we are already starting to do this, but we could certainly do more because the world still needs energy, again, today more than ever, and Texas knows energy.
Thank you. We're going to go to break now, and afterward we will resume this. In fact, we're going to be talking later on this month to some of your colleagues there at the Wind Energy Institute in Texas Tech. Thank you so much. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. I'm here today with our co-host, Tony Keene, President and CEO of EarthX, who are also our sponsors. And we have the pleasure of having Dr. Katharine Hayhoe here with us, talking about the climate change imperative for clean energy. And I'm going to throw this back to you, Tony.
Thank you, Bernice. So, Dr. Hayhoe, I mean, you started talking briefly at the end of the last segment on different alternatives that we're looking at and different new technologies. And one of the quotes that is our favorite from you is what we need to fix this thing is rational hope. So there's a lot of climate anxiety and fear circulating. So how would we collectively come together in hope rather than fear?
So much of the dialogue today is driven by fear on both sides. On the one side, there's the fear that grows every time we see a new scientific report telling us that Antarctica is melting faster, sea levels rising faster, disasters are getting stronger, wildfires burning greater area. That makes us afraid. But then on the other hand, the opposition to climate solutions is also driven by fear. Fear that the only solutions are negative and punitive, like we talked about before, that they would require us to destroy the economy or, let China rule the world. Well, that's going to happen if we don't get on board with a new clean energy economy. So rather than fear, we need hope of a better future, a hope where we have abundant energy, where we have a healthy economy, where we have the resources that we need. But that vision has to be informed by realism as well, because climate is changing and humans are responsible, and the impacts really are serious. They are here and now. They're no longer in the future. The need to act, the imperative to act, and the time to act is now. But by acting, we can end up in a better place. In fact, for the United States, according to the National Climate Assessment, which I was a lead author on, for the United States, for example, the cost of meeting the Paris Agreement targets would be less than the cost avoided, the impacts that we'd avoid by doing so, over a time horizon of around 10 years. Now, most of us are willing to invest for our future over a 10-year time horizon. And when we think especially not just of us, but of our communities, of our families, of our children, a 10-year time investment doesn't sound like that long. That's the only type of time horizon that we need to look over, and that is actually only based on looking at a limited number of sectors. If we looked at more sectors across the entire economy, the payback time would probably be even shorter than that. So the idea that there is not a better future for us is completely false. But if we continue in fear, we will become a self-fulfilling prophecy of defeat.
And you just led us to what I think is one of the most important issues surrounding climate change and our society's ability to move forward in the direction that we need to, and that is communication. I would love to see a philanthropist allocate billions of dollars to doing commercials, learning modules, all aimed toward positively and effectively communicating the ramifications of climate change to take away that fear you just talked about.
From your voice to Jeff Bezos' ears, right?
Exactly. Now, following some of the social science literature on emerging practices in communicating climate science, I've learned a lot from researchers like Dan Kahn of Yale and from books like Randy Olson's Don't Be Such a Scientist. Can you tell us more, though, about the emerging practices in the climate science world, and what are some of the most effective or impactful ways in which their findings are communicated to the public?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that is a great idea. And in fact, that's what we did with our Global Weirding series on YouTube. So I teamed up with our local PBS station here in town, KTTZ, and we created a short series of YouTube videos that address common questions that people have, all the way from the sciencey sounding questions like how do we know it's not a natural cycle to, what does clean energy look like in Texas? But here's the challenge. Our Global Weirding series was entirely unbudgeted. So we crowdsourced to get $10,000 to pay for the cartoonist to do our illustrations, and the rest of us all donated our time, and in my case, my money too. And then you go to YouTube and you watch a Global Weirding video, and then the next video that YouTube recommends is one from an organization like the so-called PragerU, which is not a university. It's the organization of a man called Dennis Prager, who fundraises hundreds of thousands and possibly millions of dollars to advertise and promote disinformation on social media. So it really is sort of like the Girl Scouts versus the Marines here, trying to get the information out to people, because the resources, as you just described, to promote accurate, truthful, factual, positive information compared to the resources to promote false, deceptive, and unhelpful information is really, really like night and day.
Yeah, that's amazing. The purpose of our show as well, but the angle that we take is to use health as a conduit to get people to listen to understand, and care about environmental issues, because everybody does care about health. So if we go in that health door, then our aim is to lead them then to the environmental door. As well, Dr. Hayhoe, I will connect with you and we will get information, and we'll actually post those videos on our website, as well as try to attach them to podcast of this show, because I think it's very worthwhile promoting that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
So, Dr. Hayhoe, I mean, as you look at all the science that's going on out there, and we always continue to hear new findings and new data that's coming out, it kind of proves that there's still a lot that we don't know about this area. What do you think are some of the kind of unknowns that remain about the future of climate change from your perspective?
Mm-hmm. So we've known since the 1850s that digging up and burning coal and gas and oil is producing heat-trapping gases that are wrapping an extra blanket around the planet. And just like you and I would, if somebody snuck into our room at night and put an extra heavy blanket on us that we didn't need, we'd heat up and we'd start to sweat. In the same way, our planet is heating up because of this extra blanket. So then people say, well, but, aren't you scientists always arguing? Oh, of course we are. We love to argue. But we're not arguing over whether climate is changing and whether humans are responsible. What we are arguing over these days is, sadly, how the planet is going to respond to this unanticipated, inadvertent, but really unprecedented experiment that we're conducting with it. As far back as we can go in the history of the planet, we have never seen so much carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere this fast. And so what we are seeing is that the changes often are happening faster than we anticipate. In Australia, with the devastating wildfires, we thought that bad of a situation wouldn't happen until the 2050s, yet it was already happening in the 2020s. We're seeing changes happening around the world, and the arguments are, how fast is the Arctic thawing, and how fast will all that methane trapped in the permafrost be released? How is climate change supersizing hurricanes, and how fast is that happening? We're arguing over how bad it is, not over whether it's real and whether it's us.
That's spinning our wheels a lot, too. We've got about 3 more minutes to go, but before we go, I want to ask you more about your faith. We know that your mission is not to change others' values, but rather to connect and to come together on the issue of climate change. And I love, love, love that you evangelize your faith side by side with climate change. So what kind of responses or reactions do you get to this? And do you think this makes climate change and environmental issues more understandable or palatable to the Christian community?
Absolutely. So to care about climate change, we don't have to be an environmentalist. We don't have to be a liberal or a socialist or a Democrat
or a tree hugger.
Communist, a tree hugger, yes. The only thing we need to be is a human living on planet Earth. Yep. Because this is where the air that we breathe comes from. This is where the water we drink and the food that we eat comes from. This is where every piece of material that drives our economy comes from. It comes from this planet. We are not designed to float around in outer space. There's no economy in outer space. We depend on this planet. And keeping this planet healthy affects our health. It affects our economy. It affects our resources. It affects our security even. It just makes sense. So I don't think that climate change needs to be moved up people's priority list as if it's currently number 12 or number 22 and it needs to move up to number 3 or number 2 or number 1. I don't think climate change should even be on our priority list at all. Because the only reason we care about it is because it affects everything that is already at the top of our list today. And so that's why when we have these conversations, as I talk about in my TED Talk, when we have these conversations, we need to start with what we share, what we have in common. For many of us, that is our faith. For some of us, it might be our concern about jobs or the economy or national security. For others, it might be our health or our kids or our local community. Begin the conversation with what we already care about, connect the dots to how climate change is affecting that, and then offer a positive, beneficial solution, of which we have so many here in Texas,
sure,
that we can engage in and support that will make our lives better and will also help reduce our carbon footprint as well.
Okay, so given that, you talk about the sharing aspect of it, so what do you think is the single most far-reaching or impactful action that ordinary people can take in their daily lives to make a change? So that way all of our listeners out there can do that.
Yes. We often think, she's going to say light bulbs or recycling, and those do help. People might say, well, she might think reducing food waste, because that's actually a big source of heat-trapping gases too, or eating lower down the food chain, and those do help too. But the number one most important thing that any of us can do about climate change is talk about it. Because it turns out we don't. And if we don't talk about it, why would we care? And if we don't care, why would we act? The social science has showed that having a conversation about climate change creates a true positive feedback effect, where the more we talk about it, the more we know, the more we know, the more concerned we are, the more concerned we are, the more we talk about it. And the number one most effective messenger to have that conversation is you. And by you, I mean us, friends and family, not experts, not scientists, not, pointy-headed experts, but individuals are the best person to have that conversation, and that is the single most important thing that any of us can do. So when they asked me to do a TED Talk, I said that's what I want to do the TED Talk on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Hayhoe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayhoe, for being with us. We actually say that every day when we end this show. We even say talk about it at the water cooler and in the grocery checkout line. Thank you so much for having been here with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. Again, that is EarthX, and Tony is here with us today co-hosting. EarthX convenes the world's largest environmental expo, conference, and film festival, promoting environmental awareness. That includes environmental business leaders and speakers, exhibitors, films, and an eco-virtual reality experience. EarthX 2020 will be held April 22nd through 26th in Dallas at Fair Park. Our other sponsor is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. We are now at the Pulse of the Community segment of our broadcast. And with me also today is co-host Tony Keene. Tony is president and CEO of EarthX, and, well, they are sponsors of this broadcast. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Bernice.
Our guest for the Pulse of the Community segment of our show is Lieutenant General Russell Honore. He is best known for serving as commander of the Joint Task Force Katrina. I read somewhere that I think the mayor of New Orleans at the time said that it was like General Patton landing. He came in, took control, and basically saved them. So we're so excited to have you with us today, General Honore, and to be able to pick your brain a little bit about the many learnings and experiences that you had with saving us, or saving the residents of South Louisiana from the effects of Katrina. Also, General Honore is going to be the keynote speaker for the upcoming 2020 North Texas Climate Change Symposium. This is the third annual symposium, and we're very excited that you will be here in our region to share your experiences with a broader audience. Tell me, General Honore, can you talk to us a little bit about how you think our national and regional leadership should look and should act at this point in order to be on top of the current and anticipated future impacts of climate change, both societal as well as the natural environment?
That's a big question. Thank you for asking this, because it remains the question of the day. Because when you talk to the people on the street, relatives at home on holidays, when we have those conversations at supper at night, we need to put focus on climate change. And one of the things we have to do as citizens is to demand that our politicians stop denying climate change, number one, because it's through the political activities of our governments, both local, state, and federal, that these changes occur. By recognizing and stop denying the fact that we are going through and are seeing the effects of climate change. So we need to, it's like your brother that's an alcoholic. The first step is admit before you can go through remediating yourself. We as a public need to change. We must accept the fact that we all can do something to reduce what is causing climate change, which is pollution. Our acceptance of that plastic bag when we go make grocery, our watering lawns and fertilizing lawns every 45 days. All those things contribute to pollution, And pollution is what's causing the climate to change.
Let me build on that a little, though, because I know that leadership and resilient leadership is your thing, then you're quite good at it. You've shown us all how to do it. Going back, though, to the national leadership, it's my sense that if there really were strong leadership on the national level, then maybe a lot of that would trickle down and there wouldn't be such widespread denialism in our society about climate change.
You're right. You're right. I think that what we're looking for is the national leadership that force a cultural change. And in your and my lifetime, we've seen two cultural shifts. And everybody was involved, from the national government, the Congress, the House, the Senate. Everybody was involved. The movie, theater business, everybody. And the first cultural shift I'd like to speak to, which I think we need to replicate in dealing with climate change, is you remember when the Surgeon General and the White House came out, we need to stop smoking, it's killing us. Then there were movies about it because people were killing themselves, literally. And then there was legislation that held tobacco companies accountable because they went into a major denial and had changed and forced politicians not to speak against smoking. It was in movies. The coolest thing in the movie was to watch the Marlboro Man on commercials. How cool was that? How many times I said, man, that's a good-looking cowboy. Look at that cigarette. I can't wait till I'm old enough to have one. So I think we need that kind of a cultural shift. The next cultural shift we saw, and led by the government and reinforced in media and in public announcements, was the cultural shift we did on AIDS. We were living a careless lifestyle. We figured out how it got started and how it was being proliferated. The next thing you know, you couldn't turn the television on without a public address talking about how we stop AIDS, and we stopped it in its track. It was a cultural shift. I think we need to do the same thing when we speak about climate change, but we need that national government. We need the state and local governments to start speaking to what we need to do to stop and reverse the impact of what we're doing with pollutants. Everything from plastics we use, styrofoam,
right,
overwatering lawns and fertilizer.
Yeah,
we can do that first, but we need a national plan.
General, I think it's a great idea. Given your experience in the whole infrastructure side of the equation, what kind of institutional structures do you think we need to have to really prepare for the cities and across our nation are all looking at resiliency? What do they need to have in place, and what's already there?
Well, we have a term in the Army called total life cycle management. When you go in that store and you buy that 32-ounce bottle of water for your 2-hour ride home, there need to be a tax on that bottle to make sure that it ends up being recycled. Or we could take action and say we're going to deny those being sold in the public. Well, I don't think we can roll that clock back. Everybody likes to buy the plastic bottle of water. But we need to have a total life cycle on that product so once it's used, it can be reused or recycled. We don't have that now. We allow the commercial sector, which is one of the biggest proliferator of plastic soda bottles, water bottles, plastic, everything, non-reusable cups that we throw out at parades. I mean, it has become ridiculous, which is driving a big petrochemical boom between Baton Rouge and New Orleans and Houston to produce the plastic enablers. We need to produce more plastic, and we don't need it. We can go into restaurants, and they will quickly put plastics out there that immediately go to the dump. And then we are reusing them. I think we're going to have to figure out a way of how, if you want a plastic bag, that plastic bag is going to cost you because we're going to have to pay to figure out a way how to reuse it and how to dispose of it. Other than doing like they're doing in New York, which is dumping them off the coast of the Atlantic as garbage and they're ending washing up in the Caribbean.
Do you see any types of institutional structures that we can develop or put in place that will help us, I guess, be more resilient against a lot of the extreme weather events that we've been experiencing?
And those extreme weather events are caused by warming seas, which when we get those coastal flows in now, they come in big microburst weather events that has flooded the Midwest. You know, I flew to Dallas a few weeks ago, and from Baton Rouge to Dallas, most of the fields that are used for agriculture were full of water. Most of the bayous and rivers were already full of water. And we have not gotten to the spring thaw. Much of that is created by the warming temperatures of the earth, which is motivated by the carbon we are producing, the benzene, and that is being released into the air, and it's warming the earth. It's not a weather cycle. It is induced by the actions of man. And what we need to do, we need to teach our children, because people my age, they won't change, but we will die. But if we teach the children well, they will have to fix this.
But, that goes back to something you mentioned earlier, and thank you so much for reminding us that we can, as a society, overcome large changes. When you mentioned about smoking and about AIDS, and I certainly remember with smoking, it was the children who led a lot of that. I remember my daughter was younger, and I used to smoke, and driving her to school, she'd have her whole head, half her body, hung out the window saying, "Oh, you're going to kill me, you're going to kill me." So it does make a difference. General Honore, one last question that we ask, and we only have just a few minutes, and that is, what can and what should ordinary people be doing in their everyday lives to drive solutions and to be resilient and to be ready for the inevitable next climate change catastrophes?
Well, I do think the most powerful thing people have to influence the future is their vote. And I know we're in a constant political season in America, but we ought to check out who we're voting for. If they're in denial of climate change, we need to, regardless of what party they're in, we need to move on. Stop voting for people who deny. We need to stop voting for people who said, well, it's not only denied, but they argue against it.
Exactly.
We need to vote for people who accept the idea that this is something caused by man and we can do something about it. They've denied the science. They've bought off many professors and universities to speak counter to that, but they're in the past. They're my generation. They're in the last 20% of their lives.
They're the dinosaurs.
We have to influence the youth that we have to make that change. And I think people can do that. Stop accepting their plastic bag, number one.
Exactly. Thank you so much, General Honore, for being with us. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you and meeting you in a couple of months at the 2020 North Texas Climate Change Symposium. Thank you. And thank you so much, Tony, for being with us. Thank you, audience, for listening to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Thank you for listening.